Hi, I'm Malik, and on my 14th birthday, my mother's family laughed in my face. They called me trash from a black janitor while standing beside my billionaire Arab stepfather. They didn't invite me to celebrate. They invited me to humiliate me. But what they didn't know was that I had 9 language certificates, a memory sharp enough to tear down empires, and a truth so sharp it made the man who mocked my father sign the contract I wrote. But that was only the beginning. Want to know what happened when I exposed everything? Let me take you back. I remember the way the elevator hummed as it rose to the top floor of the building, that steady sound filling the silence between me and my own reflection in the mirrored wall. My tie felt tighter than usual, my palms damp though the air conditioning was running full blast. When the door slid open, a rush of warm light spilled in from the penthouse. Zahir had spared no expense for this dinner. White linen tablecloths, silver cutlery that caught the city's glow, and an ocean of glass windows looking out over Manhattan. It was supposed to be my 14th birthday celebration, but it didn't feel like mine the second I stepped inside. I walked past the waitstaff, their eyes politely averted, and into the main room where my mother's relatives had already gathered. They didn't stop talking when I entered. They just shifted their glances toward me, quick and sharp, as though I'd tracked mud onto a pristine carpet. My mother, Marvette, sat at the far end of the table. Her dress was new but plain, and she held a faded handkerchief in her lap, one she'd used back when she worked double shifts. Seeing it there felt like a small tether to reality in a room built on pretense. I paused at the edge of the dining table, unsure whether to sit or wait. The smells of roasted lamb and saffron rice hung heavy, but my stomach tightened instead of growling. My uncle leaned into another guest and muttered just loud enough for me to catch, "What is he doing here? Trash from a janitor doesn't belong at this table." I froze. The words didn't shock me. They'd been whispered behind my back before, but hearing them out loud, in this space, hit differently. My ears burned. When Zahir gestured for me to take a seat, the same uncle said it again, louder, almost like a toast. "Trash from a janitor," he said, lifting his glass. A few others chuckled softly. My mother's face stiffened, her knuckles whitening around that old cloth. I sat down slowly, willing my voice to stay even. Across from me, my cousins scrolled through their phones, not even pretending to hide their smirks. My stepfather smiled at the table like a conductor preparing to cue an orchestra. "Everyone," he said, raising his glass, "to my stepson, Malik. May he find his way in the world despite the humble circumstances of his birth." His pause was deliberate. Then he looked at me with a thin smile. His father was a janitor who left nothing behind but bills. The room erupted in laughter. Not a thunderous laugh, more like a wave of sneers and snickers that washed over me. I felt it crawl up my neck, into my ears, until it filled the room. I clenched my fists under the table. The fork in my right hand shook, a small rattle against the china. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. My mother dabbed at her eyes with the handkerchief. She didn't speak. That tiny square of cloth, stained from years of work, looked so out of place next to Zahir's imported wines and cut crystal. It was the only honest thing on the table. I forced myself to breathe. In my mind, I wasn't sitting at that table anymore. I was back in the Bronx library, hunched over language books with pages falling out, the smell of old paper and bleach in my nose. I remembered the janitor at the library, Mr. Diaz, who used to whisper to me in Spanish just to give me practice. I'd taught myself 9 languages in those quiet hours. It was my way out, my way of building something my father would have been proud of. But sitting there hearing them laugh, I realized they would never see me for what I was becoming. They had already decided who I was, Zahir's charity case, a kid to be mocked at his own birthday. My stomach twisted, but I didn't cry. Not there, not in front of them. I reached under the table and gripped my mother's handkerchief. The fabric was rough, like holding on to every shift she'd worked to keep us afloat. My thumb rubbed the edge until it hurt. The laughter faded into background noise. I could hear my own breath. "One day," I whispered so low no one else could hear, "they'll regret laughing at me." Marvette glanced at me then, a flicker of something, fear maybe, or hope, crossing her face, but she stayed silent. I looked at Zahir, at his polished smile, his cufflinks glinting under the chandelier. In that moment, I wasn't a scared kid anymore. I was taking a mental picture, burning it into memory. I didn't know how or when, but I knew. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the opening act. The waiter poured more wine. My uncle cracked another joke. Someone's phone buzzed with a notification. Life moved on around me, but I sat there with my mother's handkerchief in my palm and a vow building in my chest. They thought I was invisible. They had no idea who they were raising a glass against. The laughter from last night echoed in my skull long after I left that table. I didn't sleep much. I stared at the ceiling of our small room on the service floor, listening to the elevator hum down the hall and trying to imagine what power felt like. Not the kind that bought you $15,000 chairs or made people laugh at your jokes even when they stung. The kind of power that came from knowing who you were, regardless of who sat across from you. By the time the sun rose, my mother was already dressed in her cleaning uniform. She moved around quietly, folding towels, straightening edges, trying not to wake me. But I was awake, had been for hours. "I'll be back by noon," she whispered as she tied her apron. "I'm coming with you," I said, pulling the blanket off. She looked at me, surprised. "You don't have to." "I know," I said, grabbing my backpack. "I want to." We walked to the service elevator in silence. The same one she'd ridden for years, hidden from the guests and residents upstairs. I used to hate that elevator. Today I felt oddly grounded inside it, like the claustrophobic walls reminded me that we were still real people in a building full of illusions. Zahir's office sat on the eastern wing of the penthouse. It was sleek, leather chairs, polished wood, and a giant wall of glass looking out over the skyline. My mother went straight to wiping down surfaces and organizing his scattered papers. I stayed near the corner, quiet, opening a beat-up book in Arabic I'd brought just to keep my hands moving. That's when I heard his voice. Zahir was already mid-conversation on a video call, pacing with that usual arrogance in his step. No, the shipment is not delayed. It is ta'akkar jidan," he said confidently. My eyes shot up from the page. My gut twisted. He just told them the shipment was very late, as in practically useless. But I knew what he meant to say was that it was high priority and urgent. The investors on the screen exchanged confused glances. One man leaned to the side and muttered something in Arabic to the other, their brows furrowed, but Zahir didn't notice. He kept walking, waving off their questions. "Must be the connection," he muttered when the call ended awkwardly. He tossed his phone on the desk, loosened his tie, and turned toward my mother without even glancing at me. "Water," he snapped. She moved to fetch a glass, but I stepped forward. My heart was pounding like a second heartbeat behind my ribs. "Sir," I said carefully, "you mistranslated. You used the wrong word for urgent. What you said implies the shipment's delayed, by your own admission." The silence was sharp. Zahir turned to me slowly, like I was a static on a screen he was trying to clear. His expression didn't show confusion, just pure irritation, like how dare a broom closet try to correct a chandelier. My mother's eyes widened in panic. "Malik," she hissed, "don't!" But I didn't stop. "It's a common mix-up," I added calmly. "The words sound similar, but context matters." Zahir stared. Then he laughed, a low, mocking chuckle that grew louder. You can barely speak English properly. And now you're correcting my Arabic?" Behind him, his assistant choked back a smile. I recognized that look, the same one I'd seen last night around the dinner table. Dismissal wrapped in amusement. I took a breath. I speak 9 languages. That brought the room to a halt. Zahir looked at me like I'd just claimed I walked on water. 9, he said slowly, his tone stretching the word like taffy. "Arabic, French, Mandarin, Farsi, Spanish," I began. He waved a hand, laughing again. "Enough. What's next? Klingon?" The room burst out laughing. His assistant, the driver, even the cleaning crew on the outer edge. My mother stood frozen, her hand still holding the glass of water she hadn't yet set down. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. I just reached into my pocket and gripped the edge of her handkerchief. The fabric was thin and worn, but it grounded me. The same laughter from last night was ringing again in my ears, but something had shifted. This time it didn't hollow me out. It sharpened me. I didn't flinch. I didn't retreat. I let them laugh, because I knew they wouldn't be laughing for long. Zahir leaned back in his leather chair, the kind that probably cost more than our entire year's rent. He folded his hands over his stomach and grinned. "Then prove it, boy," he said with a smirk. "In front of everyone. Right now." The air in the room was heavy, like the seconds had thickened. Everyone waited, silent. Zahir's smirk hovered in the air like a trap, one I was expected to fall straight into. I took a long breath, held it, then let the words flow. "Good morning," I said clearly in English, locking eyes with the driver near the corner. "Cómo está usted?" I turned my head slightly, directing it at Zahir's assistant. "Comment allez-vous aujourd'hui?" Smooth, confident. I could feel the temperature in the room start to shift. I didn't pause. "Oui gates." "Bene, grazie. Tutto bene?" I moved from German to Italian to Portuguese, each sentence forming effortlessly. My tongue knew these roads. I'd traveled them late at night in the corners of libraries and community centers, whispering syllables while others slept. Zahir stopped smiling. But I wasn't done. I turned back toward him. "Hal turiduni and aidu lakal tarjama?" My Arabic was clear, without accent. I softened my voice, glancing at the now stunned investors still frozen on his screen. "Ni xiangrang wa jishu fan yima?" Then, in crisp Mandarin, I let the final words land like the thud of a gavel. "Вы поняли, что я только что сказал?" Russian, with the right cadence and firmness. No one moved. No one laughed. It wasn't about showing off. It was about reclaiming my space. Behind me, I heard someone whisper, "Is that all real?" Zahir finally leaned forward, elbows on his desk, that sneer starting to rebuild. "Anyone can memorize a few lines, boy," he said flatly, like he was trying to pull the rug back from under me. "You watch some YouTube videos and now think you're a genius?" I didn't respond. Not right away. Instead, I slowly unzipped the front pocket of my backpack. The thing had holes in the bottom, one strap fraying at the seam. It wasn't meant to carry weight, but it had carried me. I pulled out a small, beat-up folder. Each page inside was neatly protected in plastic, like they were my trophies, my evidence, my shield. I laid them gently on the desk, one after another. Spanish DELI certification, French DLF, Goethe certificate for German, HSK level 6 for Mandarin, CEFR C2 for Italian, Portuguese CAPL, Arabic Al-Kitab completion from NYPL, Russian TOEFL. I passed it online from St. Petersburg University. I looked up. Zahir stared down at the papers without touching them. My mother stood in the corner, completely still. I turned to her, and for the first time in years, I saw something crack across her face. Not sadness, not worry, awe. She hadn't known. I never told her. She worked 2 jobs while I disappeared into the library for hours after school, every certificate earned in silence, every language a wall I climbed alone. "I studied while you laughed," I said quietly, facing the room again. "While you joked about janitors and servants and trash from the Bronx, I was in the basement of a public library listening to BBC language labs on borrowed headphones taped with duct tape." Zahir exhaled sharply, but I wasn't done. "You don't get to measure worth by bloodlines," I continued, voice steady now. "Not when you can't even say urgent without screwing up $1 million deal." His eyes narrowed, but he didn't interrupt. I looked around the room. Every person who had smirked yesterday, who had chuckled when my uncle called me garbage, they were quiet now, uncomfortably so. "I'm not here because I want your approval," I said. "I'm here because you invited me into a room, humiliated me publicly, and I realized you weren't even smart enough to do it in a language you truly understand." I paused. I wasn't shouting. I didn't need to. Then calmly, I stepped forward, reached into my backpack again, and pulled out a simple printed document. It was a transcript of Zahir's call from yesterday, the translation I'd done overnight. I placed it neatly on the table next to the certificates. "If you'd like," I said, "I can show you where you misused 5 terms. 3 of them insulted the investors' timelines. 2 made them think you were breaching contract terms." Zahir didn't reach for the paper. His fingers twitched slightly, but he stayed still. "I'm offering to help," I added, lowering my voice, "but only once." Silence stretched. Then he shifted in his seat. His smirk faded, and for the first time I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Doubt, maybe, or fear. Zahir's smile faltered for the first time. His jaw stiffened, and though he tried to hold that smug expression, I saw it crumble, inch by inch. He leaned back in his leather chair, folded his arms like he still owned the room, and said, "So, you know a few words, boy. That doesn't make you valuable." His voice was sharp, but underneath it, I could hear the tremor. I didn't rise to it. I kept my tone measured. Yesterday, your Arabic blunders nearly cost you 50 million. He blinked. What are you talking about? I didn't flinch. You told the investors their contract wasn't urgent. What you meant to say was time sensitive. You downplayed the pressure on their timeline. And when they asked about payment clauses, your phrasing implied you'd delay until the second quarter, not fulfill by end of month. Zahir's fingers twitched again, this time pulling slightly at the cuff of his sleeve. I turned to the investor's paused video call screen and mimicked his Arabic word for word, then followed it with the corrected version slowly and clearly. There was no arrogance in my voice, just precision. He said nothing. His silence was the only honest reaction he'd given me in 2 days. You told them you couldn't be responsible for delays when what you intended to say was, you will personally ensure there are no delays. You reversed the accountability. They left that call thinking you were washing your hands. Zahir's lips parted slightly. No snark this time, just realization. I let the moment settle before unzipping the side pouch of my backpack. This one had a tear held together by duct tape. Inside were handwritten pages, yellowed a bit at the edges, creased from being read and reread under subway lights. These, I said, laying them down, are notes I've kept for the last year. Every press release your company issued. Every translated article in Arabic, French, or Mandarin. I cross-checked them with the originals. Zahir frowned. Why the hell would you do that? Because your ego writes checks your translations can't cash. His eyebrows shot up. The room stayed deadly still. You don't speak Arabic well enough to handle international press, I continued. And the Mandarin translation of your Beijing release last November, it made it sound like you were reneging on a supply contract. That cost your company the Shenzhen deal. I've got copies. From behind me, I heard a sharp gasp. My mother. She stepped forward, hands trembling, her voice barely above a whisper. Malik, please. That's enough. I turned to face her. Her eyes were wide, pleading. But what broke me was her voice. It carried years of fear. Not fear for me, fear of what power could do to me. I softened. Ma, if I stop now, they'll never stop treating us like we don't belong. Like we're background noise. She looked down, a tear slipping onto her cheek. She didn't speak again, but she didn't ask me to stop either. I turned back to Zahir. He hadn't moved. His gaze was locked on the papers I laid out, like they might burn him if he touched them. This isn't about being impressive, I said. It's about truth, about not letting your money erase mistakes or silence people like me, people like my father who worked hard and died without applause, people you mock with champagne in your glass and our names in your mouth. Zahir slammed his fist on the desk. It echoed like a shot. You're crossing a dangerous line, boy, he snapped. Do you even know who you're challenging? The heat of his voice filled the room. He wanted to scare me. He wanted to put me back in the corner, but I didn't blink. I looked him straight in the eye and answered, yes, and I'm not afraid anymore. The air changed. Zahir's posture didn't shift much, but his eyes, they burned colder now. There wasn't mockery in them anymore, just something sharper, darker. He leaned slightly forward in that absurd chair, fingers tapping slow against the polished glass of his desk. You think this little performance of yours makes you brave? He asked, voice low, too calm. Let me explain how the world really works. He stood finally. His shadow stretched long across the floor as the morning sun poured in behind him. I don't lose, Malik. I don't get humiliated. Not in my house, not in front of my people. I've buried stories deeper than your entire family history. Judges, editors, CEOs, they answer my calls before their own wives. And you think some certificates from a library make you dangerous? He circled behind me slowly, deliberately, like a lion trying to make the prey sweat before the pounce. Let me ask you something. Do you know how many careers I've ended before lunch? How many families I've relocated out of this city just because they said the wrong thing in the wrong room? His breath was closer now, just behind my ear. I can make your mother disappear from this building before noon. No pension, no recommendations, just gone. And you? He chuckled without smiling. You'll be back scrubbing tables in the Bronx while your backpack gathers dust in a pawn shop window. My fingers curled inside my jacket pocket. The fabric of my mother's old handkerchief was damp from my grip, knotted between my knuckles like I was holding on to something more than cloth. Fear crept in. Not the kind that makes you scream or run, but the kind that speaks softly, tells you to fold, to bow, to keep the peace. I could feel it rising from my stomach, coiling around my chest. Zahir moved back to the desk, unbothered, smirking like he already saw me shrinking. "You really want to play this game with me?" he asked. "You think standing here reciting textbook Arabic and throwing tantrums makes you someone I should respect?" I didn't respond right away. My tongue felt like stone in my mouth. Behind me, I heard a small rustle, my mother, shifting her weight. I didn't turn, but I could picture her expression, the tension in her hands. She knew this tone in Zahir's voice. She had heard it before, behind closed doors. She had survived it, but now, I was the one standing in its path. Zahir leaned on the edge of the desk, voice suddenly soft. "One more outburst like today, and your mother's gone. And your future with her." It hit like a slap. Not loud, but direct. Clean. Cruel. For a moment, I almost crumbled. All the nights in the library, those secondhand textbooks, all the hours watching free lectures on borrowed Wi-Fi, suddenly, none of it seemed enough, because he wasn't threatening me anymore. He was threatening the one person I couldn't bear to see suffer again. I turned slightly toward her. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She was holding her breath, clutching her cleaning rag like it might turn her invisible. I wanted to stop, wanted to fold. But something inside refused. I saw a flicker. Faces of kids I'd met at the library. Names I'd never forgotten. Anthony, who translated Spanish for his mom while getting bullied in class. Amina, who learned code in secret after her uncle said, "Girls like us don't belong in tech." Kids who were always told to sit down, stay quiet, be grateful. Silence never saved them. I turned back to Zahir and said, "If the truth threatens you this much, maybe you're the one who should be afraid." The room went still. Zahir's nostrils flared. His jaw clenched hard enough to show veins. Then came that laugh, cold, hollow, not even pretending to be amused. He pulled out his phone from the desk drawer, tapping the screen with calm malice. "Let's see how brave you are," he said, voice flat, "when I destroy everything you love." And with one call, he tried to make good on his threat. Zahir didn't even glance at me as he brought the phone to his ear. His voice, calm and composed, sliced through the room. "Security. Send someone to the East Wing. Pack up the cleaning lady's things. She doesn't work here anymore." No hesitation. No pause. My mother's hand flew to her chest. Her face drained of color. The rag she'd been holding fell to the floor without a sound. "Zahir," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible. I turned to her just in time to see her knees buckle. I moved instinctively, catching her before she hit the floor. Her weight in my arms felt unfamiliar, so small, too light. For a moment, I forgot everything else. "I'm fine," she murmured, brushing me off as she stood, embarrassed. "It's just a little dizzy spell." But it wasn't. It was the weight of humiliation, of years of silence, loyalty, and labor being tossed aside with a single sentence. Zahir watched with a cruel sort of calm. "This is what happens," he said, "when you try to bite the hand that feeds you." I turned back toward him. "You didn't just fire her," I said quietly. "You made an example out of her." He didn't blink. "Exactly. Let that be your first lesson in power." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat was tight, dry. All I could hear was the faint hum of the city below, the slow ticking of that massive wall clock behind him. Then I felt it again, that familiar fabric, the handkerchief in my pocket, warmed by my grip. I rubbed the edge of it with my thumb. I wanted to scream, to yell, but something else rose in me, something steadier. I stood up straight and looked him in the eye. "You keep saying I'm just a boy," I said, "but if that's true, why are you this scared?" Zahir's jaw twitched. "Scared?" I didn't answer. I just reached into my backpack. No sudden movement, no dramatics, just slow, calm certainty. From the front pocket, I pulled out a small USB drive. The one I'd carried for months. The one I'd loaded with files late at night at the library while the rest of the city slept. I walked over to the desk. He stepped in front of me. "You don't get to touch anything in this office." "I don't need to," I said. "Just give me your laptop for 5 minutes." He laughed. "Why would I ever?" "I'm trying to save your company." That froze him. Not long, just a flicker. But I saw it. Behind me, the staff who had remained awkwardly quiet were now shifting, watching. Reluctantly, Zahir turned his laptop toward me. "This better be entertaining." I plugged in the drive and opened the first file. A spreadsheet popped up, then another, then slides, charts, emails, timestamps. I clicked through them methodically. "This is a summary of missed contracts over the past 9 months," I said. Each highlighted deal was lost either due to miscommunication or translation errors you personally signed off on. Zahir's smirk faded as his name appeared on screen after each document. I clicked again. "These are investor summaries with the corrected translations, Arabic, Mandarin, French. In each case, your message was diluted, or worse, misrepresented." Another click. "These missed deals total more than $47 million in projected revenue. And that's just the public-facing data. I haven't even touched the internal memos." Silence. Even the staff weren't breathing. I could feel the air shift. Zahir's lips parted, but no words came out. Then I said, "You've already cost your empire more than my mother could ever take from you." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his face changed, subtle but visible. Not panic, not yet, but unease. He looked at me as if seeing me fully for the first time. The smirk returned, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You think you've done something impressive?" He slammed the laptop shut, the sound sharp and final. "I don't care what you found. I built this empire from nothing. I can burn it down and build it again in a week." His eyes narrowed. "If you want war, boy VA, then you'll have war." And that was the moment he decided to crush me completely. Zahir didn't explode. Not with fists or screaming. No, his fury was quieter than that. More calculated, like a predator circling its prey, eyes cold, steps deliberate. The moment I stood tall, he began pacing and smiling. That smug, twisted smile of a man who had played this game longer than I'd been alive. "You think a boy with a few papers can ruin me?" he said slowly, dragging each word. "I built empires with less than you carry in that ratty little backpack." He stopped pacing and turned sharply toward the center of the room. "Let's give everyone something to talk about, shall we?" He reached into his desk drawer with theatrical precision and pulled out a thin brown folder. The edges were too crisp, too prepared. "I wasn't going to use this," he said, eyes on the staff gathering near the doorway. "But since you brought war to my doorstep, you leave me no choice." He opened the folder and pulled out a printed document. His hands didn't shake. Mine did. "This," he said, waving the page, "is a report from an anonymous informant, alleging that your so-called certificates were obtained through fraudulent means, that you cheated on each of your tests, that your skills were fabricated." I felt the ground shift beneath me. The room, which had been filled with a hush of respect a moment ago, now buzzed with uncertainty. I caught the eyes of a few staffers, curious, doubtful, suddenly cautious. One by one, they stepped back, just enough to say, "We don't know you anymore." Even my mother's breathing changed. Zahir tossed the page onto the center table with a dramatic flick. 9 certificates, in 9 languages, lies, just like your father's life. Cheap, disposable. That last word cracked something open in me. But before I could react, my mother spoke. "Please," she whispered, not to Zahir, but to me. "Don't fight him anymore. We can leave. Let it go, Malik." Her voice didn't shake from fear. It cracked from weariness. Years of swallowing pride had turned her voice thin. I looked at her, and for a moment, I almost did what she asked. Almost. Because that right there, this, was what he counted on. That we'd back down before the lie stuck. That if he could just humiliate us loud enough, long enough, no one would bother looking deeper. And maybe I would have walked out if I hadn't heard it. In my head, not out loud. My father's voice. A memory, not a ghost. "Don't let silence define you." I wiped my face with the back of my hand. No tears now, just clarity. Zahir watched me like a snake watching a cornered animal. Smug, certain I'd fold. I didn't speak right away. Instead, I reached forward and gently picked up the forged paper. I held it like it was a fragile thing. It was, really, a desperate man's shield. "Nicely printed," I said, examining the signature at the bottom. "No stamp, no issuing body, no source. You had your assistant throw this together, didn't you?" A flicker of something crossed his face. Just for a moment. "I'm impressed," I said, smiling thinly. "You move fast when threatened. Watch your tone." "Or what?" I cut him off softly. "You'll fire me? You'll fire her again?" He said nothing. I stepped back and looked at the others in the room, his staff, his advisors. Some avoided my gaze. A few didn't. "If I'm a fraud," I said, voice steady, "then tomorrow morning I'm sure the investors will be thrilled to hear it. Let's see who they believe. A 17-year-old with nothing to gain, or a man who's already lost millions and needs a scapegoat." Zahir didn't move. I tucked the forged sheet into my backpack like a receipt for a lie I'd return later. "See you in front of the board." His mask cracked for just a second. The grin slipped, not entirely. But enough! And that was the moment the battlefield shifted from private insults to public judgment. By the time I arrived at the boardroom on the 52nd floor, the sky outside had already darkened. Manhattan glittered through the glass walls like a galaxy trapped in steel. I could see my reflection in the tall windows, jacket pressed, folder tight in my grip, nerves barely contained beneath the surface. I wasn't walking in as the cleaning lady's son anymore. At least, not just that. The room smelled of expensive cologne, legal briefs, and tension. Zahir was already seated at the head of the long table, flanked by his inner circle and investors I'd only ever seen in framed articles. The same men and women who had dismissed me with polite smiles when I'd walked my mother to work. Their expressions now were more guarded, but I could feel the curiosity in the way they shifted in their leather chairs. Whispers rolled through the room like a wave. "That's him? The boy from yesterday? The janitor's kid?" Zahir didn't acknowledge me at first. He leaned back, arms crossed, that forced calm on his face again. But I caught it. The tight grip on his glass of water, the twitch in his jaw. He knew what was coming, or thought he did. He broke the silence by slamming a paper onto the polished table. "Before we waste everyone's time," he said loudly, "you should know this young man, this child, has been impersonating a polyglot. Forged credentials, fraudulent documents, 9 certificates, none real." A few gasps. One investor leaned toward the page as if it might catch fire. "Are you certain?" someone asked. "Beyond a doubt," Zahir answered, eyes locked on me. "It's embarrassing, really, but I suppose the hunger for attention runs in his blood." I didn't flinch. I simply stepped forward and placed my folder directly in front of the lead investor, Mrs. Diane Rhodes, chair of the International Oversight Committee and someone who hadn't smiled once since I entered. "Ma'am," I said calmly, "if you'll allow me." She gave the slightest nod. I opened the folder and laid out 9 sheets, each in its protective sleeve, each with a gold seal and a notarized stamp. Originals, dated, verified, from accredited testing institutions. I said nothing else. Let the silence prove what Zahir's voice couldn't. Then I reached into my backpack and pulled out a slim black recorder. "May I?" Mrs. Rhodes nodded again. Zahir's face twitched. The recording played, a snippet from an investor call 3 months ago. Zahir speaking confidently in Arabic, and butchering a key phrase regarding contractual termination, then a translation overlay correcting the error, followed by another in Mandarin, where he'd confused the word for expansion with eviction. Subtle, but expensive. "These errors," I said, eyes on Zahir, "cost your firm an estimated $28.6 million across 2 quarters. The evidence is public. You just didn't notice, because you trusted the wrong person to speak for you." Whispers turned to murmurs, chairs shifted, fingers tapped pens nervously. "Enough," Zahir snapped. "This is a distraction. He's twisting context. These are cherry-picked mistakes." I nodded slowly. "Then let's test the room's memory." I handed out copies of the documented deal breakdowns, complete with internal communications, investor reactions, and language audits. Every loss tied back to a word Zahir didn't understand. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't even look around the table. All I said was, if my certificates are fake, then so is every word your deals depend on. Choose wisely. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Zahir's face darkened several shades. He gripped the table edge like he needed it to keep from toppling over. Mrs. Rhodes cleared her throat. Mr. Zahir, she said evenly, can you explain these discrepancies? He stammered. Actually stammered. I had never seen him hesitate in public, never seen his words stumble over each other like loose stones. He said something about context, about youthful ambition gone too far. But no one was listening anymore. I placed the final document on the table. This, I said, is a proposed revision of the Beijing contract, translated line by line, culturally validated and corrected. You can sign it today and begin recovery of the firm's standing in the APAC market. Or you can ignore it and keep bleeding money. Another long pause. Someone whispered, he's got us cornered. Zahir looked at the paper like it was acid. His hand hovered over the pen, then slowly curled around it. The scratching of ink across paper echoed louder than anything said that night. When he finished, he dropped the pen like it burned him. Then he leaned toward me, eyes narrow, voice low. You'll regret this. I leaned in closer, calm as glass. No, you will. And as he stormed out, the laughter from the room no longer stung me. It stung him. Weeks passed. The high-rise boardroom, the confrontation, the forged document, all of it felt like a distant echo. Yet it lived in the corners of my mind, showing up in moments like this one. I sat alone at a modest cafe in Harlem, tucked into the corner near the window. The air smelled like cinnamon toast and burnt espresso. Outside, the city moved with its usual rhythm, honking horns, rushed footsteps, conversations floating in the wind. Inside, I let the warmth of the mug seep into my palms. I wasn't reading. I wasn't checking my phone. I just sat there thinking. The memory of my 14th birthday, the laughter, the insults, the whispered jokes about being trash from a black janitor, still played in my head sometimes. But now it didn't cut the same way. It had become quieter, not gone, just dulled, like the taste of bitterness left too long in the sun. Zahir had gone silent since that night. The news didn't call it a scandal, but it made its rounds. Phrases like internal restructuring, damage control, and loss of investor confidence appeared in articles. Some of his closest partners quietly backed away, calling it a matter of values. Others stayed, but the shine around his name had dimmed. The man who used to boast about never bowing had been forced to sign a deal written by the janitor's kid. He still had money, still had power, but he didn't have control anymore, not the way he used to. The cafe bell chimed softly behind me. I didn't turn around right away, but I recognized her perfume before I saw her. Subtle, powdery, the kind she always wore on Sundays, even when we had nowhere to go. Malik, my mother said gently. I stood, offered her the seat across from me. She didn't order anything, just sat, hands folded on the table, staring at the steam rising from my cup. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, with her eyes still downcast, she murmured, "You were right." My throat tightened. I didn't expect an apology. She wasn't raised to give them easily. Pride and survival ran too deep in her bones. But those 3 words, they landed heavier than any speech. "They'll never stop unless someone stands," she added. Her voice cracked, just slightly. I reached across the table, resting my hand gently over hers. She didn't squeeze back, but she didn't pull away either. That was enough. The rest of the family hadn't said a word since the fallout. Some avoided me entirely. A few, like Cousin Lenny, shot me sharp looks at Sunday gatherings, as if I'd betrayed some unspoken code. The ones who laughed the loudest at my father's memory now walked on eggshells. They wouldn't say it, but I knew. I'd changed things. And not everyone liked that. Back at my apartment that night, I sat at my desk and opened the drawer I never used for bills or keys. Inside was the folder I'd been carrying since the confrontation. 9 certificates, notarized, laminated, the signed contract from Zahir, his scrawl barely legible. And tucked in the back, a photo of my father in his janitor's uniform, smiling despite everything. I placed the picture beside the certificates and closed the folder slowly. Victory didn't feel like champagne or confetti. It felt like quiet, like stillness, like standing in the wreckage of a storm you survived. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. I could still hear that voice in my head, trash from a black janitor. But now it didn't echo with shame, it pulsed with pride. My father never needed a title to stand tall, and I didn't need anyone's permission to claim what he passed down. Dignity, resilience, truth. His words from years ago came back, not as a whisper, but as a steady beat. Don't let silence define you. I repeated it under my breath, not as a boy desperate to believe it, but as a man who had lived it. The next morning I returned to the same cafe. This time, I brought my laptop and a notebook. No folder, no documents, just thoughts. A young boy sat 2 tables away, fiddling with a small puzzle cube. His mother looked exhausted, typing into her phone between sips of lukewarm coffee. The boy glanced at me. "What's that word you said yesterday?" he asked. "The one in another language?" "Which one?" I smiled. "You said it meant hope." I nodded. "Amal," I said clearly. "Mal," he repeated, tongue tripping over the syllables. "Close enough," I chuckled. "It's Arabic." He grinned, proud of himself, then looked down at his toy, whispering it again like it was magic. I watched him for a moment, then opened my notebook. I wasn't writing to prove anything anymore. Not to Zahir, not to my cousins, not even to my mother. I was writing because I could, because it was mine, because I finally understood that legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you choose to build when no one thinks you can. On my 14th birthday, they mocked me. But today, I write my own legacy, and no one will ever erase it again.